Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Huxley Barbee, who is a security evangelist at runZero and organizer of the BSidesNYC event. Huxley has a graduate degree in risk management, and he used to work for Cisco, SparkPost, and most recently, Datalog, where he formulated the Datadog cloud security platform. Huxley, thank you for joining our Risk Management Show podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me, Boris. Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure too. So, Huxley, could you tell us a short story about your career path? What brought you to where you are right now, and what you guys at runZero are up to these days?
Yeah. Okay. So, don't want to get too far into it because it's quite a long history here. But I got started in the security business in the late 90s. One of the first things that I did was scan my own company with a tool called Satan, system administrator tool for analyzing networks. And that sort of started my career in security, and I was deploying firewalls and things like this. Later in my career, I moved into things like secure web gateways, secure messaging, and then ultimately I ended up having my own consulting practice at Cisco, where I led a team called Security Orchestration, where we automated security operations as well as automating incident response playbooks. Fast forward to runZero. I joined runZero because they were solving a major problem for security in general around asset inventory. It's such a basic building block for any good security program, but unfortunately, there hasn't been any really good solutions up until recently. So I was really excited for the opportunity to come and work with them to get the word out about the importance of good asset inventory.
All right. So I believe that we will have a very thoughtful conversation on the topic of asset inventory and to demystify us about this topic and what concrete security vulnerabilities companies face when they are not fully aware of the network assets, with some maybe actionable tips. So can you explain us how asset inventory is a bedrock of risk management?
Well, if you think about it, whenever we do any sort of risk management exercise, right, you want to start out with a risk assessment. And typically what you want to do is you want to identify what are all of your assets. And of course, in a general risk management framework, it's not just about compute devices, but also people, also about like other types of like data assets and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, you want to identify what are all those assets first, and then you gauge or you measure what is the severity or the impact if that asset were somehow compromised. And then you decide what are the security controls that are going to be commensurate with the severity or the impact of that that particular asset. So this is all risk management 101. So, but how do you fully satisfy that risk management 101? At the very start, you need to know what all of your assets are first. And with some types of assets, it might be easier to understand what are all of your assets. You generally speaking know who are all the people that work for your company, right? Usually there's like really good controls around around people, around HR and things of that nature. But when you look at some of the other areas of an organization, maybe like documents, and certainly the case is true for compute devices, there is not a very good handle on what are all those assets. So without a full asset inventory or a comprehensive asset inventory, it makes it very difficult for you to have confidence in any sort of risk assessment that you might conduct on an organization. So for that reason, really good asset inventory is one of the bedrocks for a good risk management program.
Mm-hmm. So why it became so untenable problem in the last years? Is it because of explosion of assets or what?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to put it most succinctly, there's been an explosion of assets. That is 100% true. but I can dig a little bit deeper into that for you. Really, there's been a number of technological trends in the last 20 years that have led to this sort of explosion. One of them would be the rise of IoT devices, right? So if you think about it, 20 years ago, you didn't have an Amazon Alexa. Printers weren't necessarily on the network. Many things like IP cameras didn't really exist. They were just cameras, right? So there's been this explosion of IoT devices that have entered the home as well as all of our businesses. Another technological trend is the convergence of IT and OT. So OT, operational technology, used to be on completely separate networks that were completely disconnected from IT. But for a variety of reasons, including wanting to streamline the management of these OT networks, OT has been overlaid on top of IT. And one consequence of that is that many of these OT networks are now accessible from the internet, which creates a new attack vector for the adversary. Another technological trend is the rise of cloud, right? So now your assets are not just in your office, but it's also in whichever cloud service provider that you choose, perhaps more than one cloud service provider. Another technological trend is the rise of BYOD, right? So there are now people who are bringing their own devices into your network, that these devices that they may or may not have the same type of security controls that you would have with your own stuff. Another one would be work from home. Of course, work from home has been this rising trend for many, many years, but it was compounded by the pandemic, of course. And so now you have both corporate assets and personal assets that are in the home that can or potentially can have access into your corporate network. And I would say one final technological trend has been the rise of mergers and acquisitions, right? If you look at the aughts, right, 2000 to 2010, if you look at the number of mergers and acquisitions in those years versus 2010 and 2020, it's 2010 to 2020 is about 2 times what we were seeing in the 2000 to 2010. So all of these technological trends have been contributing to this explosion of assets. And it's not just the number of assets, but also where those assets are, right? They're not just in the corporate office anymore, but there's also in the cloud, in people's homes, in the factory, in the hospital, and so on and so forth. And then coupled with this divergence of assets is also the decentralization of control. Users are more and more empowered to be able to change their attack surface without ever telling anybody. So rise of the cloud came along with the rise of DevOps. And so developers were empowered to just spin up new compute devices left and right. And there wasn't necessarily the same type of, governance and risk and compliance measures that were applied to it. And it is true, 20 years ago, there were some tools that were sort of okay for dealing with this problem of asset inventory, but they were okay for dealing with asset inventory for managed IT devices in the office. And, fast forward 20 years later, those tools are just completely inappropriate for the new reality.
Mm-hmm. So which approach is required now to overcome these obstacles? And are there any benchmarks or regulatory compliance ramifications from asset inventory?
Right. Okay. So I'll start with the solution approaches first. There have been many approaches that have been attempted, right? Some folks like to attempt to use agents for doing asset discovery, but the problem with that is you can only put agents on things you know about. So if there's been this explosion of assets that you might not completely have a handle on, there might be devices out there where you didn't even know about. So of course you can't put an agent on there. The same is going to be true for authenticated active scanners, because if you can log into something, then you probably already manage that too. So it also leaves out the things that you don't know about, the unmanaged, unknown devices. And so these two approaches are really good for managed IT assets, but not the rest of the stuff. There's also the solution of using passive network monitoring, where you have a collector that's hooked into your switch, or there's a tap on the network. And these can actually discover devices you don't know about, But the problem with them is they can only identify those devices based on limited network traffic. And especially because more and more traffic is being encrypted these days, it's a question as to whether or not passive network monitors are going to be of any use going forward. One other approach is the use of APIs, where you basically download asset details from other systems within the organization's tech stack. But unless those source data know anything about unmanaged or unknown devices, they're going to be limited to managed IT assets as well. So one final approach is use of unauthenticated active scanning. And with this one, you can actually go out and scan the entire network to figure out what's out there. Whether this solution works well or not depends a lot on how well that solution also fingerprints those devices. So whether or not that solution can actually leverage the type of information that you would get over the network in order to accurately identify an asset. So what we have found is what you really want to do is have a combination approach. You want to have an unauthenticated active scanner that is coupled with a good security research-based approach for fingerprinting, right? So this adept ability to use leaked information from devices in order to identify them accurately. And then to bring that unauthenticated scanning capability along with API integrations. You're still going to want to use API integrations because that's how you're going to capture the devices that are not connected to the network at the time, or they're known through other systems like cloud assets and things like that. So what we found is a combination of unauthenticated active scanning that's powered by a security research-based approach with API integrations gives you that full breadth and depth of asset inventory. Mm-hmm. But to answer the second part of your question, regulatory frameworks and compliance, things like this. So both NIST and CIS benchmarks talk about asset inventory as a fundamental must-have control within your security program, right? So in fact, with CIS benchmarks, good asset inventory, a comprehensive asset inventory, I think is their exact language. The comprehensive asset inventory is actually CIS control number 1. Like that is how fundamental that it is. This absolutely must be in your security program if you're going to have a fighting chance of mounting a credible defense against attackers. It is an absolute must-have if you're going to have a fighting chance at having a proactive security program. NIST says something similar, but of course, these are just like recommendations. Really, one of the main regulatory requirements that we are familiar with, it's mostly on the US side here, is CISA. CISA recently released BOD 2301, which actually requires that federal civilian agencies have a comprehensive asset inventory that is able to enumerate the entire IPv4 space within a certain amount of time. So that is the one of the instances of a hard requirement for asset inventory. But they're also like in some cases financial compelling financial reasons for this. So there's some cases where we've seen that cybersecurity insurance companies requiring that you have a certain percentage of your devices covered by endpoint detection and response, right? Like let's say 95%. So exactly how does a company certify to the insurer that, hey, 95% of our assets are covered by EDR? I mean, unless you know what 100% is, you can't really say what 95% is, right?
Interesting. So let's discuss about your company. What's something you or your team at runZero have recently achieved that you are really proud of?
Well, something that we've always been proud of is that time and again, folks from the security practitioner community have publicly come out and said, to all their friends and colleagues that runZero is the best asset discovery tool that they have ever tried, right? Not only are we able to discover all sorts of assets by type, whether they're IoT or IT or even OT, right? So we're safe for scanning OT devices as well. But just in terms of like the sheer accuracy and the level of detail that we're able to provide is incomparable, right? We have an unparalleled capability around handling asset inventory. But there are other more like tactical things that we've done that have really sort of helped the community. So we have a rapid response program that comes out of our security research team. And when there's a major 0 day that is published in the news, the security research team is working in high gear, getting the word out there about how to use our tool most effectively to identify these new vulnerabilities that are coming out. And we take pride in the fact that if you're using our tool, you have the ability to mount a more immediate day one response to a 0 day. With some of the other solutions, you might have to wait a week or a few days for a vuln check to be published, and then you have to run a scan of your network to find those vulnerabilities. With our solution, you're actually able to mount much more a much quicker response to that type of new vulnerability in the wild type of situation.
All right. I would like to ask you your personal point of view. So what is the commonly held belief or major misconception as it relates to cybersecurity that you are strongly or even passionately disagree with?
And in cybersecurity that I disagree with?
Yeah. In your field of knowledge, maybe it's because cybersecurity is very broad, maybe in your special field of knowledge.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, and we'll take this back to risk management, one of the things is I find that oftentimes the security community, especially the security startup community, is really focused on risk mitigation, as opposed to a wider or more holistic view of risk management in general, right? So, going back to risk management 101, we're all familiar with the risk management matrix, right? High versus low probability, high versus low severity. And then based on where you fall in that bucket, or based on where you think your asset value is, and you decide on the measure, the risk management measure, right? So risk prevention, risk mitigation, risk avoidance, and so on and so forth. And I feel like a lot of folks who are on the business side really focus on risk mitigation, not realizing that organizations have a much wider set of options when they're handling or when they're looking at their organization as a whole, right? Where, in some cases, it might make more sense for the company to do risk acceptance, right? And so when you go around and start pitching to customers these really expensive risk mitigation solutions, it might not actually resonate, because risk acceptance or risk avoidance might actually be the more economically effective way of handling that situation. And so I feel like a lot of folks just don't really think about that, and they don't think about that big risk management picture, and they just really focus on risk mitigation instead.
Mm-hmm. So for example, if we take a life of a risk manager, if there is one thing that they should start to prioritize right now that they are not doing, what would it be from your point of view?
Well, I still think we have to go back to fundamentals, right? You still, at the very least, you need to know what you have, right? You need to know what you have in terms of documents, in terms of people, in terms of physical assets, but also compute assets. If you don't have that, right, there's going to be very low confidence in any sort of risk assessment that you do. So you got to go back to the fundamentals. At the very least, you need to know what you have.
Mhm. So what is your approach to innovation? Because there are a lot of cybersecurity companies. Maybe there are some companies that are doing the similar things that you guys are doing. And what is a your unique approach?
Well, I think this comes down, and it's going to sound like an age-old story, but you got to focus on the customer, right? We pride ourselves on being very, very responsive to our customers and listening to our customers. Time and again, customers have told us that our response is bar none. Not only do we, do like an initial like email back to the customer, like responding like, hey, acknowledging that you contacted us, but like the response in terms of issue resolution is also very fast, right? And so those are two different pieces, and we get fantastic kudos from customers on both of those measures.
Mhm. And looking broadly in your industry, what are the major trends in this space that you expect will take place in the coming few years?
I would say it's a continuation of the same trends. We will continue to see assets, the number of assets just explode, right? Nobody's attack surface is ever reduced. That's not going to happen. It would be a very naive thing to think that somehow you can reduce your attack surface. That is not, that's basically like saying I'm going to eliminate all my risks. Like that is also a naive thing to say, right? So you have to accept the fact that your attack surface is going to grow. That is going to happen. And so what you need to do is figure out a way to manage it, right? Not somehow try and do the thing that's not possible.
Okay. So you also said you are organizer of an event, besides NYC. Is there anything going on there with regards to risk management?
Yeah. So for the listeners who are not aware, because this is more of a risk management audience, BSides is a framework of community-driven grassroots security conferences that are for security practitioners by security practitioners, right? So it's very different from an RSA or Black Hat, or in your neck of the woods in InfoSec Europe. It's going to be very different from one of those types of conferences. And they're also the regional. So there's a BSide San Francisco, there's BSide Las Vegas. I'm the organizer for BSides New York City. I'm sure there's a BSides Amsterdam as well. And yeah, so looking at the papers that have been submitted to BSidesNYC, so our next conference is on April 22nd, 2023. And I actually do see two papers that were submitted that are around risk management. One is around GRC, about how GRC, governance risk compliance, about how GRC can be an enabler for a business. That sounds like a very interesting topic. And there's another one that talks where the talk basically goes through a step-by-step on how to do a quantitative risk assessment on for your company. There's no telling. I don't know what framework this person is using. It's not in the abstract. I don't know if it's using the FAIR framework or something else. But yeah, at least two submissions around risk management. So I'm really excited to see if either one of those are accepted by the CFP board.
All right. So, just for risk people who are based in the NYC, New York City, please take a look, and maybe if you go interested, go ahead and go to this event.
Yeah,
So
our
maybe,
URL, our website is bsidesnyc.org.
okay, okay. Okay, so if we summarize our interview, if someone who is listening to this interview would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would it be?
Well, I think one major takeaway is that a good asset inventory is a must-have for your security program. It is not a nice to have. I know this sounds like really cliched, but like you can't protect what you don't know, right? So you absolutely must have a comprehensive asset inventory if you're going to mount a credible defense, if you're going to have any chance of having a proactive security program. So that is probably the number one takeaway for anybody who's listening to this. And number two is, I welcome any of your listeners to go and try for themselves, but hands down, I do believe that a combined unauthenticated actor scanning approach plus an API integration approach is probably the best bet you're going to have at getting to a comprehensive asset inventory.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Huxley, for your time. And if I forgot to ask you something that you would like to share with our audience, please go ahead.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn, it's Huxley Barbee, HuxleyBarbee. I'm also on Twitter at Huxley_Barbee. I'm also on Mastodon. So it's at Huxley at infosec.exchange.
Fantastic. All right, Huxley, thank you very much. And success to your event and to your company. I hope we will continue working together and speaking with you guys maybe in a few months about another topic.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Boris. Thank you so much.